Okay, so the next two slides, almost like you shouldn't, they're too basic for this class, but on the other hand, I can let you get out of this class without not knowing these things. So here are a few things for very basic visual structures and graphs that you run into all the time. So one type of graph is this one, the line graph. And the idea here is that there is one point here and there is one point here. But the way the graph shows it, it shows these points connected. So in other words, if they show the points connected, so it means that on the x variable, and maybe even the y variable, but at least on one of the variables, probably x, because it's more, usually x is the more important axis, just the way people assign it importance. It means that there is something in between these 2 points. So between here and here, there is something every other point that exists. So if it's almost like Monday, Tuesday, kind of don't work. But if it's ordinal, maybe it's still going to work. You definitely don't want to have nominal data in there. So cow and dog, what's between cow and dog? So the idea that if we're using a line, at least one of the axes, by the way, this is the wrong example to use because if you kind of zoom in, you'll see that it's nominal data here. So it doesn't, there is nothing in between. I think this may be HP and IBM or something. There's nothing in between. There's not an HP and a half. So we shouldn't use these. Like I said, it probably will work with ordinal data because Monday, Tuesday, kind of see it go from Monday to Tuesday. So ordinal and quantitative data, that's probably fine. But for nominal data, you definitely don't want that. Why? Because I can reorder stuff. I can take this variable and move it here, and I can take this variable and move it here. And that will change the shape. Let's just give the wrong idea. The slope, I can make the slope always go up if I really wanted to, just by reordering the data points. So for nominal data, where there's no order, if there is at least some order, then the graph still has a meaning for us. The other one, bar graphs, talked a little bit about it. They tend to work well. First of all, they start from the same axis. They can be horizontal or vertical. In this case, they start from the horizontal axis. They allow pretty kind of, they're very sensitive. You can see a little bit of variation right there. The fact that the red may be slightly bigger than the blue. And the closer the bars are, the easier it's going to be to compare them. If they're further apart, like these two here, the blue ones there, it's going to make it a little bit harder to see which one is taller. And generally, they show values in the sense that they don't want to show proportions. So most of the time we use bar graphs for that. The other one that we're using, it's a scatter plot, and it generally shows it has two variables. For example, temperature on one and height on another. If we want to compare temperature, if we want to see if there is a correlation or something between temperature and height, a scatter plot, you know, if somebody, you have a mad scientist thinks the temperature changes the height of people, you can try it. For plants, probably, you have more. So trying to see if there's a correlation between temperature and the height of trees. And that's a scatter plot, the relationship between two variables. How do we see correlation in a scatter plot? if there is correlation, it's going to be around all the points are going to tend to be really close to the main diagonal there. Basically, what it means, the higher the temperature means we're going this way, the higher the height. So it can show correlation. If most points fall close to that diagonal, then we see correlation. There may be noise. There may be a point or two that are outliers, or this can be a little bit fatter, and then the correlation is not as good. If it's really thin, then we have good correlation there. I'm going to erase that. It can also show inverse correlation, and that would be on the other diagonal, same discussion. So the higher the temperature, the lower the height would be there. So maybe that particular plant doesn't like high temperatures. So that would show correlation. It can also show other things. For example, let me clear annotation. For example, it can show groups. It may be that I have a bunch of dots here and a bunch of dots here. So basically tell me that there's more or less two clusters of data. So, and for some of them, everything I told you about diagonal may happen for a cluster. So, for example, for the data in this area, it may be correlated, and the data in this area may be just showing two cluster uncorrelated, and the data in this area may be, again, correlated or inverse correlation. So it's possible to show different behavior, not just the overall. So one of these, it's generally better than just looking at R square, that you would look at traditional statistics that tells you R square of 95, you have really good correlation. R square of 0.01, little correlation. This one can tell you that there are groups, and within the groups there can be correlation or no correlation. So it gives a lot more information about the data, but it's a pretty good thing for, in general, looking at correlation, looking even at under the hood on that correlation type. And the final one, pie charts. And again, I know everybody kind of understands pie charts and bar charts, but pie charts show proportion differences, not absolute values, but proportion. So if, let's say, if these were the number of, stop signs in Little Rock, and this the number of lights, and this the number of yield, and pedestrian crossing, and so forth, each of them means something in Little Rock. It may be just by accident New York has the same proportion, but they may have 100 times more stop signs, and the graph may look exactly the same. It's just everything is 100 times more. So the relative proportion of everything shown in here is going to be different. It's going to be the same, sorry. But the absolute number, if we were to look at it as a bar chart, we would see that Little Rock is really small and New York is really high on that. But looking at it through proportion, we may see that it's the same proportion of things. So that's what the pie chart does. I think it's pretty obviously. Sometimes some visualization tools, including the ones that do automatic stuff, may try to show a pie chart that's smaller versus a pie chart that's bigger. It's still, you can still see the differences. It's not going to be as good as looking at a bar chart. Because, if I draw two of these, which one is, and I know my drawing is bad, but which one is smaller channels? And sometimes they can be at different parts of the picture. So comparing them, unless there's a big difference, you're not going to see it. So that's one attempt to kind of combine a bar chart with a pie chart together. Another attempt may be to stack bar charts. We could stack them and everybody will have 3 of these. And you can see a little bit of a proportioned that way. It's not as clear as a pie chart, but still possible to kind of have something in between. But like I said, generally bar charts values, pie charts proportions. From statistics, independent versus dependent variable. So here are some example. The independent would be the season. Most of the time itself or anything related to time is going to be considered independent because we can't really control time. So things that we can control are going to be dependent. Things that we don't control are going to be independent. And many times in an experiment, sometimes you can kind of flip from one to the other, from control to what you control, what you don't. Like I said, temperature versus height. Temperature we don't control, and height, sorry, we control the temperature, and then the height we don't control. So the height is going to be the dependent variable because it depends on the temperature, and then the independent is going to be temperature in that previous example. So generally, well, it's not written here. I thought it was. Well, it is. It's just very, very very faint. It's somehow it got translated into yellow and white. But the independent variable is going to be on the x-axis generally, and then the dependent variable, you can see a D faintly there, is going to be on the y-axis. If there's more than one independent variable, like time and temperature and so forth, most important one goes on the x-axis, and then we could use different colors to differentiate something else, like here have two different colors for the other independent variable. Yes. However, I was told one time some business school field, I'm not sure, marketing, finance, they do it the opposite. By all the journals in their field report it that way. So everybody, like I said, there's a caveat there. It may be, there's a very limited number of fields, and I heard of that one, and I can't remember which one it is, that does it the opposite, puts the independent on the X. But most scientific fields are going to put independent on the X-axis. What did I say? That field in kind of business school studies, I don't know which department in business school uses, or research department uses more kind of the opposite. So, like I said, time, many times you will see it on the x-axis because we really can't control time unless you could, which is really nice. Would be really nice. So these are two slides. They were just kind of very simple structures, simple things to consider. I don't want you to get out of this class without knowing them. Now, another thing, I'm not sure that this is in any of the books. I kind of took this slide from a different class and put it in here. And it's this idea, there's this Gestalt psychology, the Gestalt movement, it's been on before computers, so I think for hundreds of years, at least 100 years, if not two. A lot of psychologists and people studied how we perceive, and they found all kinds of tricks to our visual system and so forth. You could probably take a whole semester just looking through all different Gestalt accomplishments, philosophies, and so forth. Here, I just mentioned these little ones that people kind of pull them in. And this is from a human-computer interface class. Visualization is a specialized type of human-computer interface. So it's human data interface, but data still comes from the computer. So here are kind of situations, proximity, things that belong together. So most people, most of us will see these three grouped together. We're not going to see a relationship between this one and this one here because they're further apart. So that's kind of pretty straightforward. Same thing with similarity. Although, in this case, although one circle here is further apart than this one, we're going to see them related to each other rather than seeing the circle related to the triangle there. So if we're using shapes, colors, things like that, we're going to see them together that way and separate. The next one is closure. If you look closely, you would see that this particular circle is actually not a circle, is interrupted, but we tend to look at it as a circle. And let me share my screen. That's actually, this principle has been used to trick you for years. I'm kidding, it's not tricking, it's just been used a lot. And let me take this out. And let me take this out. Here. We only see this much of the window behind it, but our view fills in the blank. And instead of the operating system having to display both on top of each other, which is, I don't know, even possible. But notice for the window behind, we only see the edges, the extremities, we kind of fill in the blanks. We assume there's something there. So that is an example of where we fill in the blanks. Our brain fills in the blanks. There's another window behind it, and it's square. Well, whether you don't see it or not, you still know it's a rectangle. Sorry, not a rectangle, but it's not a square, but a rectangle. So that's an example. A smaller one would be, you can even see it here to a lesser degree, not the pop-up, but you can, it shows two of them, but you only shows the edges of one here. Okay, so it's one icon and then a little bit of an edge, and then we assume there's more stacked on top of each other. So our brain fills in the blank, and all the Windows systems that we're using are using that that Gestalt thing. There's no window behind it. We don't even know if it's, maybe changed shape, but we still assume it's going to be a rectangle that kind of goes this way. And somewhere here goes this way. The one behind. And now the one here, we're only seeing just a little bit of it, and we can still kind of make, our brain fills in the rest of it. So the circle that was displayed in that, let me go back to the slides. Again, 100 million clicks later. The closure part here is just a little bit that's missing at this point. But sometimes I show an example where there's a lot missing and then our brain just fills in the blanks. Kind of the same thing, filling in the blanks. It's going to be the continuity. It's D here. So we tend not to think of these as separate points, but we kind of start to see a pattern like an X. Although it's just the same amount, it's the same points that we have there. But because they are stretched out in that fashion, our brain will tend to interpret them as two lines that cross each other. Another one is going to be symmetry. And again, in here, we tend to think of these as working together. Just like we're not going to see these two as being part of the same thing. We're going to see them as separate. So it just, all of this closure, continuity, symmetry, they can play tricks on us, or we can use them, if the visualization use them wisely, it may work for our advantage. To kind of figure out where some begin and something ends. This one is also from that book, from the Human-Computer Interface. And again, kind of in Gestalt world, it's this idea of what are we looking at here? And the problem here is black or white. We don't know which one is the background. Is the background black? Our visual system tends to ignore the background and focus on the foreground, and it has a hard time doing it right now because it's unclear to our eyes which one is it, black or white, that's the background. So and actually it's also probably a mixture of the two. Some of the foreground is white, some of the foreground is black. Anybody can figure out what we're looking at? Here it's a cow. You can see the head, ears, another ear. That's kind of the nose, the eyes, and the rest of the body right there. Now that I told you, you're going to be able to see it. But and they have all of these tricks with this one where you have a young lady and an old lady being in the same picture, things like those. So it's all that matters where, and the visual, like I said, our visual system has a problem segregating the background from the foreground. And again, to keep it more confusing, the same color is sometimes background and sometimes foreground. Okay. I think I may stop here because the next topic I'm not going to finish in 10 minutes. It's this idea of pre-attentive processing, the magic of our visual system. Some of these things work really neatly. But let's talk more about on Wednesday about this thing. Because it, like I said, probably takes at least 15 minutes to go over it. I'm not going to finish. I don't want to be stuck in the middle of it and continue. So, like everything is pre-recorded. So if you ever want to go ahead and look it up, you can always have everything pre-recorded. But I'll pick it up on Wednesday.